The wind rolled and sharp off the ridge, dry and cold as a bone saw. Elias Mercer pulled his coat tighter, his boots creaking against the frost-hardened trail as his horse eased down the last slope toward home.
Ow!
The sky had turned the color of bruised lavender, clouds pressing low like a roof about to cave. Snow hadn't yet fallen, but it loitered close, waiting for the final breath of daylight to vanish before it laid its claim across the prairie. Elias didn't hurry. He rarely did. The ranch had been quiet for years, ever since Mary passed, and quiet suited him now. The fences were mended, the firewood stacked, the livestock fed. Man could grow used to silence, if only because silence didn't ask for anything. But that night, silence broke. He spotted it just beyond the gate, a buckboard wagon abandoned, the mule still tied to the post. No lantern, no boot tracks, just the hush of the wind, and something darker crouched beneath the trees. He approached slowly, hand near the rifle slung across his saddle. What he saw in that wagon pulled the air clean out of his lungs. A young woman, perhaps 20, Apache by the look of her braids and cheekbones, lay on her back across the boards, her shawl frozen stiff where sweat and snow had mingled. She looked carved from driftwood, unmoving but not lifeless. A newborn pressed against her chest let out a mule, so weak it barely stirred the air. Pinned to her torn dress was a scrap of paper, scrawled in rough ink. She would not speak. I'd leave her to you. Elias stared at it a long moment. He didn't curse. He didn't pray. Just read the words again, like maybe they'd change meaning the second time. They didn't. His first thought wasn't compassion. It was burden, trouble, questions. But then the baby gave a cry, thin and raw like a throat torn from screaming, and that sound struck a deeper nerve. He swung down without a word, bundled the child in his saddle blanket, and lifted the woman gently, carefully, like she might splinter in his arms. She was cold, not the kind of cold that clung to the skin, but the kind that lived deep in the marrow. A cold that made him wonder how she hadn't died already. Inside his cabin, the hearth still held embers. He stoked the fire high, the flames clawing to life in jerks and snaps. He laid the woman on his dead wife's cot, the smaller one near the wall where Mary used to sit and sew during the late hours. Elias didn't think about that, not directly. He just did what needed doing. The baby cried and cried. His fists were blue at the knuckles, face red from the cold, mouth hungry. Elias had no milk, but he warmed water, dipped the corner of a cloth, and pressed it gently to the child's lips. It sucked instinctively, quieting some. The woman still hadn't moved. He boiled another pot of water, dipped a towel, and began wiping the frost from her arms, her neck, her dirt-streaked forehead. There were bruises along her jaw, a slice across. One palm crusted dark. Her skin beneath the grime was olive-toned, fine-boned, beautiful in that fragile way a fallen bird is. Before it knows it's broken, the fire grew. The shadows deepened. Elias moved like a man who'd done this before, though he never had. Not for a stranger. Not since Mary. He worked without words, without plan. It's only the constant need of the moment guiding his hands. He gave her the warmest quilt, not the patched one, Mary's old one. The one that still smelled faintly of cedar and lilac. The hours passed slow. The woman never stirred. But Elias didn't sleep. He sat in the rocker near the fire, boots still on, coat half buttoned. His hand resting absently on the butt of the rifle leaned against the hearth. The baby slept now, tucked inside a basket with a flannel shirt for cover. The cries had stopped, not out of comfort but exhaustion. Snow tapped faintly at the windows. Wind moaned through the rafters like an old dog dreaming. And in that room, too full of ghosts, too quiet for comfort, Elias stared at the flames and told himself this wasn't his doing. That come morning, he'd take them to the preacher, or the trading post, or the reservation's edge. Somewhere, but deep down, he knew. When a baby cried on a woman's chest, and the woman was ice cold, a man couldn't just walk away from that. Not if he'd buried one before. Not if he still sat awake in the same chair where she'd rocked each evening, listening to silence like it was the only sound left in the world. The morning came slow, blue, and bitter around the edges. Snow had fallen steady through the night, blanketing the ranch in a hush so thick it made the world feel paused. Elias stirred the coals to life again and put on coffee, though he didn't drink it much anymore. The habit remained, as some ghosts do. The woman woke with a jolt, like someone mid-fall. Her eyes darted around the room, sharp and hollow. She clutched the baby tighter against her chest, the movement instinctual, fierce. Elias didn't step closer. He only nodded once and placed a tin cup of water and a plate of cornbread on the table before walking back to the stove. She didn't speak. She didn't touch the food until he turned away. Later, she sat near the hearth, back to the wall, knees drawn up. The baby suckled quietly. Her eyes followed Elias wherever he moved, not curious, wary, coiled like a dog that's been hit before and never learned to forget. He asked her name, not loud, just once, across the table while buttering a slice of bread. She looked at the fire instead. He didn't ask again. That afternoon, she swept the floor without being told. Her steps were light, careful. She cleaned the ash pan and fed the stove. Didn't touch anything that wasn't hers. Didn't speak a word. Elias said nothing, just let her move. She stayed that night and the one after. When the blizzard passed and the roads opened again, she still didn't leave. Nor did she ever look like she meant to. Each morning, Elias watched her braid her hair in tight rows, hands moving fast, precise. She never used a mirror, didn't need one. The braids weren't for beauty. They were armor, structure, something to hold when everything else slipped. Away, she bore scars, thin and pale, along her wrists, one curling just below the collarbone, not fresh. Old winters, old battles, ones Elias would never ask about. Her silence was not emptiness, it was weight, a shield drawn inwards. Sometimes Elias heard her hum, soft and tuneless, while rocking the baby to sleep. She never did it when she thought he was listening. He kept his distance, mostly. Talked to the horse more than he talked to her. But the house, which had once felt wide and echoing, now felt full, not cramped, but lived in. Mary used to fill it with laughter, stories, the scent of cinnamon and lilac. Elias had boxed most of that away, tucked the rocker against the porch wall, left the sewing kit untouched in a drawer, stopped boiling coffee just for himself. And still, late at night, he thought he heard her laugh. Not ghostly, not haunting. Just remembered. He stopped using that end of the porch altogether. Even the old tin coffee pot sat too heavy between him and the woman now, neither of them reaching for it, like it belonged to someone else entirely. The woman he still didn't know her name began feeding the chickens without prompting. Kept the baby wrapped in flannel and tied across her back with a woven cloth that had seen better days. Elias offered her one of Mary's old shawls, left folded in the cedar chest. She paused when he held it out, fingers brushing the wool. Took it wordlessly. Wore it without thanks, but with care. Days passed like thawing snow, slow, damp, unsure. Still, something began to breathe beneath it all. One evening, Elias returned from the woods with fresh logs slung over his back. The sun hung low, bleeding orange through the branches. As he approached the barn, he heard something he hadn't heard in years, humming. It's not hers this time. But the baby's quiet coos mingled with her soft voice. Hush. She stood beside the corral, her braid hanging over one shoulder, feeding the horse with slow, open palms. The baby was curled against her chest, eyes closed, safe. The horse, usually skittish, with strangers, nudged her shoulder gently. She didn't flinch. She looked up when Elias stopped a few yards away. Their eyes met, not long. Just enough. He offered a nod. She returned it. No smile, but something had changed. Later, he set her an extra slice of bread at dinner without asking. She placed a piece of it in his plate in return. Neither of them spoke. That night, Elias sat out on the steps, watching the moon rise above the tree line. The cold stung his knuckles. His breath fogged in the air. Inside, she rocked the baby beside the fire. He listened to the creak of the floorboards and the soft, rhythmic sound of the cradle moving. He didn't know what shape the past would take, or if it could be reformed at all. But as the wind moved through the pines and the stars blinked in silence above them, he began to wonder, maybe the past didn't need to disappear. Maybe it just waited, quietly, for something new to grow in its shadow. The storm came in quiet, not with warning or howl, but with a sky gone flat and white, and a stillness so deep it swallowed sound. The trees stood like ghosts in the distance. Even the crows vanished. By the time the wind truly arrived, it shook the windows and curled beneath the doorframe like a beggar with cold hands. Snow pelted the cabin walls with a rhythm that had no music in it, just pressure. Just wait. Elias bolted the doors, stuffed rags in the cracks, and moved the firewood. Inside, he didn't say much. Neither did she. She sat near the hearth, with the baby cradled on her lap, sewing an old quilt Elias had nearly forgotten. Her stitches were small, neat, precise, the way someone worked who had no time for luxury, only necessity. The baby slept. Often now, warm and pink-cheeked, swaddled in what scraps of wool they had. Elias sat across from her, oiling a chisel, the metal shining like frost. The room smelled of pine and old bread and something heavier, the scent of people who had shared too many silences without, asking for more. The storm rattled the roof like it was trying to peel the whole thing back. But inside, time crawled, slow and strange. On the second night, the wind grew teeth. The rocking chair beside the window groaned on its own, pushed by nothing visible. Tana, he still called her Anna in his head, glanced at it once, but didn't move. Elias pushed it back against the wall, quietly. Then they went on with their night. They didn't sit together, but they stayed close enough to hear the other's breath. On the third night, the blizzard still hadn't passed. Wood crackled sharp in the hearth. The baby had fallen asleep in the basket again. Her head rested against her mother's chest. One small fist curled near her cheek. Elias poured 2 mugs of water, set one by her side. He didn't expect a thank you, didn't need one. The fire snapped louder. Storm thudded above, relentless. And then without much thought, Elias began to speak. She bled for 3 days, he said. His voice didn't seem to belong to the room. It came from somewhere deeper. Rough, cracked. I buried the child before I buried her. They wouldn't even let me put a name on the grave, said there hadn't been a birth certificate. Tana didn't move. She didn't look at him. But she listened. I kept that little crib for 3 winters. Then I burned it. I thought maybe the fire would help. Shifted in his chair, staring into the flames. It didn't. Its silence fell again, long and thick. He rubbed the rim of the mug with a calloused thumb. I didn't speak much after that, not to anyone who stayed. She said nothing. But after a moment she stood slowly without a word and crossed the room. Her bare feet didn't make a sound on the floorboards. She placed one hand on his shoulder. Light as breath, it lingered. Then she returned to her spot. The gesture wasn't dramatic. It wasn't soft. It was simply shared. That night, as snow piled against the windows and wind clawed through the eaves, Tana finally spoke. My name is not Anna. Elias looked up from the flames. She didn't flinch. It's Tana, he nodded once. Said nothing, my people. They turned their backs when I came back pregnant. Said I had brought shame, that I was cursed. Voice didn't waver, but it was quieter now. He was a white man, sold cattle in town. Told me he'd come back for us. Then he vanished. Elias didn't ask for his name. Didn't offer excuses for the man who'd left her with nothing but breath and consequence. They left me outside the mission post. I walked 3 days with the baby tied to me. No milk, just snow. Her fingers pulled the shawl tighter around her shoulders, though the fire burned steady. And still, I couldn't hate him. I wanted to. I prayed I could. But all I could feel was cold. The storm, as if exhausted, began to slow. The howl softened to a moan. The timbers in the roof stopped groaning. Elias stood and added 2 more logs to the fire. The flames rose. Shadows danced up the stone. He glanced back at her. You made it, he said simply. Tana nodded, barely. The baby stirred, a soft cry. She lifted her without effort, pressed a kiss to her hair, and rocked gently. Elias stepped toward the window, peered out. The world had disappeared in white. But somehow, the cabin felt warmer than it had in years. Behind him, Tana said, "Thank you for letting us in." Elias turned, surprised. Not by the words, but by the way they settled into the room. Like something finally earned. He nodded again. "No one should freeze to death," he said quietly. Neither of them spoke again that night. But when the wind finally died and the fire lowered to soft, steady coals, something in the room had shifted, not in shape, in temperature. When the storm broke, it didn't shatter, it melted. The days turned damp and cold, not sharp. The white faded into brown slush, and the wind lost its teeth. By the end of the week, the sky showed color again, and birds, hesitant but hopeful, returned to the fence posts. The world came creeping back. A rider passed on the road, someone from the feed store. He slowed when he saw the smoke from Elias's chimney, slowed more when he glimpsed the figure of a woman out near the well. Didn't wave. Just narrowed his eyes beneath the brim of his hat and rode on, dust trailing behind him like suspicion. 2 days later, the preacher came. White collar, stiff voice stiff, smile tighter than barbed wire. Elias stepped out onto the porch before the man even dismounted. The preacher said something about concerns, about what the town was whispering, and asked flatly if Elias was harboring a savage. Elias didn't reply, just stared at him a long while, jaw tight. Then turned, walked back inside, and shut the door. Let the man preach to the cold. Inside, the fire kept its rhythm. Tana was feeding the baby mashed potatoes with 2 fingers. Elias crossed the room, hung up his coat, and went about the rest of the evening without mention of the visit. But something had settled between them since the thaw. Not cold, not warmth. Something harder to name. The child had taken to crawling, clumsy and laughing. His giggle filled the corners of the cabin like sunlight spilling into old cracks. It was Luca now. Tana had whispered it one morning when she thought Elias wasn't listening. He remembered it, said it quietly once when. The boy grabbed his pant leg and squealed. Tana had smiled, real and fleeting. The air inside the house had changed. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was pattern. Shared days. The woodpile stacked by both their hands. Meals made without discussion. Her shawl always folded neatly on the same hook beside his hat. But patterns, like people, resist too much. Change too quickly. One afternoon, Elias came in from the shed and found his old shirt hanging by the hearth, washed, mended. His hand paused mid-dash reach. It was the flannel Mary had sewn by hand. The one with the blue stitching she'd insisted made him look less miserable. The cuff had been frayed for years. Now it was clean. The rip gone. Thread smooth and unfamiliar. He didn't say a word. Just turned away, jaw clenched, chest suddenly hollow. Tana noticed. Her eyes tracked the way he shifted. She didn't apologize. That evening she sat by the fire, weaving a tiny sock for Luca. Elias remained outside longer than usual, splitting. But long after the light faded, the baby's laugh didn't bridge the silence that night. Later, long after the lamps were out, Elias passed by the open front door on his way to the well and stopped. Tana sat alone on the porch, the baby asleep. Against her chest, the rocker creaking beneath her. The same chair Mary used to sit in, knitting by starlight. The same chair Elias hadn't touched in 4 years. Tana was crying. Not loudly, not for show. Her head was bowed, her shoulders still. The kind of crying that needed no audience. He should have stepped back, given her space. But he didn't. He walked to the edge of the porch, the boards cold beneath his boots. She didn't look up. "If you want us gone," she said quietly, "say it plain. But don't pretend we're not already ghosts to your neighbors." Her voice didn't carry accusation, just truth, soft and hard in the same breath. Elias said nothing. Not because he didn't have words, but because the right ones would cost him something. He disappeared into the cabin. When he returned, she was still rocking, still staring out over the yard where the moon hung low behind frost-dusted trees. Elias knelt beside her and placed something in her lap, a tin box, small, dented at the corner. She looked down at it. Then at him. He didn't speak. Didn't open it for her. But when she lifted the lid, the firelight caught on a silver ring, dulled with age, and a folded piece of blue wool fabric from a shawl worn thin with love. Tana said nothing. Elias didn't wait for her, too. He stood slowly, walked back inside, and left the door open behind him. Spring came in soft without fanfare. It dripped from the eaves and crept beneath the frost like a secret kept too long. The snow shrank back into the earth, and with it, the weight that had settled in the bones of the house seemed to lift just a little. Light poured through the windows earlier now. The stove didn't burn as hot, but it still burned. Tana planted herbs near the porch, her fingers brown with soil, nails broken, shawl tied around her waist. She spoke to the earth like it would remember her voice. She planted with intention chamomile, mint, sage. Nothing decorative. All for use. Elias watched from the barn roof, hammer in hand, fixing shingles that had split under winter's weight. He didn't say much. But when she looked up and called, "Ela, pass me the bucket," came down without hesitation. She called him Eli now, and he let her. The days filled in quiet ways. She baked bread again. Just for hunger, but with something close to joy. It made the cabin smell like it used to. Like home. He boiled coffee even when he didn't want it, just to see her face soften when she drank the first warm cup. He mended a broken stair on the porch. She made him a new pair of mittens from old wool. They didn't speak of the past anymore, not directly. But it hummed between them like the distant sound of horses, always there. One night the baby burned. Hot? Tana's hand shook as she pressed her wrist to his tiny forehead. "Something's wrong," she whispered. He won't stop crying. The fire was too low, the wind too loud. Elias didn't hesitate. He wrapped the boy in 2 quilts and carried him into the dark, saddled the horse without a word, and rode toward town through the mud and fog. When he returned before dawn, soaked and shaking with a bottle of medicine in his hand, there were tears in his eyes he didn't wipe away. Tana took the child and the medicine, but she didn't let go of Elias's hand afterward. Not that night. And not the morning after. Their closeness came not with declarations, but with gesture. She set his cup beside his plate without looking. He tied her shawl behind her neck when her hands were full with the child. She began to hum again. Louder this time. Sometimes with actual songs. One morning, Elias walked in from the shed and found her braid undone. Her hair fell over her shoulders like black silk, wild from sleep. She didn't rush to tie it back. She let it fall. He didn't stare. But he noticed that afternoon he pulled old pine wood down from the rafters, cleaned it, sanded the knots. Smooth. She watched from the porch as he began building. "What is it?" she asked quietly. "A cradle. You already had one." "I burned that one," he replied, steady. "This one'll be used." Her hands trembled on the edge of her apron. She didn't speak again for a while. He carved it by hand, slow and careful. The curls of pale wood gathered at his boots. The cabin smelled like cedar and sap. When he was done, he placed it beside the hearth, then stepped back, without pride, without ceremony. She looked at it a long time, then at him. "You built one before?" He nodded. Tana stepped close enough to touch the grain, her fingers barely grazing the edge. "It's beautiful." "It's yours," he said, "all of it." That night the baby slept easy, chest rising slow, arms sprawled like tiny wings. They sat by the fire, both of them worn, both of them quiet. Her hand found his first. No wind moved through the cabin. No coyotes cried outside. The wood popped. In the fire like it always did, but softer now. Their kiss wasn't sudden. It wasn't planned.
Ow.
It didn't come with music or moonlight. It came beside the dying fire. With the child between them, his breath rising and falling like a lullaby. Neither of them had earned, but both had fought to keep. It wasn't grand. It wasn't loud. It was necessary. The news came with the buzz of flies on a carcass, sudden, sour, impossible to ignore. Someone from town had seen him, the man, the one who'd left Tana bruised and silent, child on her chest, body cold from snow and shame. He was back. Loud and smug and full of poison, said the boy was his, said Tana had stolen him, called her names Elias wouldn't repeat, called Elias worse. By the end of the week, a summons arrived. Official stamped folded hard at the corners. The town gathered like they always did when they smelled blood in the water. Some came out of curiosity, some out of hate. Most came to see how far Elias Mercer would fall, and what would be left of the girl who had dared to live in his house. Tana dressed slow that morning. She combed her braid down her back, loose but proud, wore the shawl Elias's wife had once folded in the cedar chest. Held Luca at her hip with one arm, steady as a mountain. She didn't look at Elias for instruction. Didn't need to. He stood beside her, not ahead. Courthouse, the room hushed like a throat-catching breath. It creaked. The preacher turned away. Someone spat. The man Luca's father was already there. Smiling, greased hair, sharp suit. Said the right words in the wrong tone, claimed his son, claimed parental rights, claimed Elias had hidden Tana like a stolen horse. The judge was tired, worn down by years of cattle disputes and boundary brawls. He looked at Tana with no kindness, looked at her skin, her silence, the child in her arms. He asked Elias if he had anything to add. Elias didn't speak right away. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, thick, yellowed at the crease. Signed and notarized. A deed. He handed it to the judge without a word. The judge adjusted his glasses. Read, then read again. You're transferring joint ownership of your land. Elias nodded once. To her, another nod, and the child. Elias cleared his throat. Luca Mercer, heir and son. A murmur rippled through the room. The man's voice rose, spitting accusations, insults, fists clenching. He called it manipulation. Said Tana had seduced an old fool. Said she was a liar. Said the baby was his, and he'd take him by force if he had to. Elias didn't flinch. Stared at him. The judge raised a hand. Enough. The courtroom fell quiet. Miss Tana, the judge said, his tone shifting. Do you wish to speak? She didn't hesitate. I do. Her voice didn't tremble. She didn't cry. She just said what needed saying, that she had never hidden, only survived. That no man had ever claimed the child until now. That Elias hadn't taken them in. He had seen them, not as shame, not as debt, but as people. I won't run again, she said finally. And I won't be handed off like land. The judge looked at her a long time, then at the baby, then at Elias. Case dismissed. The father stormed out. Boots clapping sharp down the courthouse steps. No one followed. The sun had begun to lower by the time. The wagon rattled westward again. Back toward the ridge. Back toward home. Tana sat beside Elias, her head resting lightly against his shoulder. Luca giggled at the horses, waving tiny fists at the prairie wind. They said little. But it wasn't silence anymore. It was peace. When they reached the old fence post, the one where she had first arrived, barely breathing, the child wailing on her chest, Elias slowed the reins, then stopped. He climbed down and pulled something. From beneath the bench seat, a small carved wooden sign, sanded edges. Letters burned in with care. He nailed it gently into the post, then stepped back. Tana squinted and smiled. The sign read, Mercer Home, 3 souls. The sky behind it flared, gold, and the wind, for once, was warm.